So hello, I'm Rafat Merzoub, and I'm very excited to help moderate this conversation and kickstart a series of meetings developed by OpenScape for the next 2 years. Fair Leaderships is the first team we're engaging with as OpenScape, focusing specifically on possible frameworks, experiences, and speculations that rethink and dismantle the rigid hierarchy and exclusive power structures of cultural institutions. We're joined today by three practitioners pioneering how one can imagine and implement new context-sensitive leadership formats. Jehan Manekshaw is joining from India, Sarah Matchett from South Africa, Liliane Abuzaki from Lebanon. The panelists today will contextualize their experiences and share their thoughts for around 5 minutes, and then we'll move together into a dialogue for around 20 minutes where we would be able to unpack these experiences, ask more questions, and think forward. I'd like to thank everyone again for making time to join us, and we can just jump in and start the conversation. Sarah, are you comfortable to start?
Yes, I am. Thanks.
Great.
Thanks, Rafat. So, I think it's important to contextualize the Center for Theatre, Dance and Performance Studies, as well as my role as its current director or head of department. The CTDPS, which is the acronym for the Center for Theatre, Dance and Performance Studies, is a department within the Faculty of Humanities, within an institution that is the University of Cape Town. And I am of the view that the university is inherently an unkind space. It's a hierarchical, colonial construct that favors structure and not relationship. And so the position of head of department or director, as is the case with me, is rotational, with someone new typically coming into the position every 3 years. And academic seniority determines your appointment to the position of head of department. And it's expected that you should fulfill this role at least once in your tenure at the university. So in 2020, 3 months after the pandemic hit the world, it was my time to step into this leadership role. And there was no induction, no training. I had to find my way into it. And I was rather shocked at how much HR I had to do. And so I'm basically a manager of people, and I feel like I'm an administrator on steroids. And this is certainly not what I entered academia to do. I came into the university to teach theatre and performance, to research and to make performance. So for me, the function of the role was not very clear before I found myself in the position. My predecessor headed up the department on and off for a period of 9 years. And during this time, they implemented a number of very successful changes. And the most major being the merging of 2 departments, that of the then drama department, which they were the head of, and the then School of Dance. And we merged to become the Center for Theatre, Dance and Performance Studies in 2018. And I'd like to ponder this merger for a moment. Basically, the directive to merge came from the Dean of Humanities. And my predecessor did an excellent job in driving the process. They came up with a very well thought through plan and model that they presented to us as colleagues, and we were left with the task of implementing the plans. Now, I understand that the need to present a very clear plan was necessitated by the directive from the Dean. However, it became evident a year or 2 into the merger that the merger process, which was not very consultative, not very collaborative and inclusive, started to raise very real challenges. So when I stepped into the position in 2020, I was clear that I wanted to foster a collaborative, inclusive and relational style of leadership. And I came into it with a sense of confidence and humility. And I've approached the role as that of a facilitator, very much like I approach my role in processes of making theatre. And one of the things we did was to start a visioning process. And we started off by forming portfolio committees where everyone, academics, administrators, and technicians in the department, form part of committees that work towards goals that will ultimately assist the center to become a truly merged entity, a center that teaches across theater and dance, a center that builds psychological safety as a core competence, and a center that explores ways of offering thought leadership to the broader theater and performance industry in South Africa. And the process has brought us to a point where we realize the necessity to completely revise the pedagogical model. And we're at a point where we need to radically change it to respond to an unpredictable emergent future. And this is probably going to be the biggest change that has happened in the last 50 years of the department's history. So instead of coming up with a neat plan of how to do this that I present to my colleagues, I have opted to create a collaborative environment that allows for everyone to input. And I'm aware that this can often be messy. It's not easy. It's difficult, and it's sometimes frightening. And so being in the unknown and allowing it to be unknown is often scary. So in this process, I've drawn from Lawrence and Sodabi's work on institutional work, and where they've identified 3 categories of people in institutional process: the disruptor, the creator, and the maintainer. And I must say, I'm beginning to see these 3 categories of people emerge. And I realize that as a leader, my job is to help manage people for the best outcome, to remain aware that each person is adding value, even if they are seemingly giving you a hard time. And it's valuable to appreciate everybody's role and everybody's views, because it's a way of working with contestation, I guess. And I find myself contemplating the need to draw on the ways in which we work in the center with students, ways that are embodied, relational, and ways that are collaborative. And the research we undertake is embodied and emergent and is most often informed by practice. So for me, the challenge is to find a way to facilitate bringing what and how we do in the classroom and research spaces into the institutional and organizational space as we embark on this process of revisioning and radically transforming our curriculum. Thanks, Rafa.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I think I'm thinking perhaps because Sarah and Jehan are dealing with kind of things within academia, maybe we can break it a little bit with Liliane and then go back to Jehan, just so it's it expands it a bit. So Liliane, are you ready?
Sure. Hey guys, Sarah, Fad, thank you guys. That was beautiful, Sarah. Thank you. It's so nice to hear relational and embodied in the same kind of conversation around leadership. I come from a humanitarian development field. That's where I work now. I've had a history in tech startups in product direction or product management, and later in introducing online campaigning to Middle East and North Africa for Amnesty International, where it was really about how can we take research around violation of human rights and kind of action it online to mobilize and move people. Amnesty had 7 million members at the time, the largest membership being in MENA. Regardless of that position or positions in tech startups, where basically as a product manager, you are that person that basically pulls or orchestrates all those red lines into one, and you're supposed to make sense both upwards to the C-suite and downwards to the staff or to the people who are designing or actually building. Essentially, even my role now in innovation portfolios in the humanitarian field, I feel leadership has consistently been something of a fleeting notion. before, in my 20s, I was obsessed with the form of leadership that I inherited from my ex-banker father, from generation of men in politics who I would consistently see in TV. I saw something I wanted. And for the longest time, I thought it was leadership. Till I actually kind of discovered the wheel of privilege and oppression and its relationship to power. And how now my obsession is power. So surprise. But basically, moving on from leadership, I think leadership, a definition that really influenced my 20s largely, and I really thank that definition because it really got me to take initiative, is something I read in HBR once that said, power is what happens when everyone is playing ice hockey with accountability. Leadership is what happens when everyone's playing ice hockey with accountability. And I loved that. It kind of drew this relationship to accountability. It kind of really weaved into my practice accountability and attribution, which I still use to this day. And those are kind of the structures that I miss as a design. Like, I'm trained as a designer. I identify as an artist. And I have to be in rooms of bureaucracy, politics, business, and so on and so forth. So for me, this kind of conversation has come at a perfect time. I would almost call it spiritual synergy, because basically I am at a time, I'm 33 now. I can kind of look back at my 20s and I see what that kind of notion of inherited leadership and its kinship to top-down power has given me as an aspiration. And now I also see, as someone who teaches in university, identifies as a facilitator, tries to consistently create harmony while also getting shit done, how hard those worlds can come to be. And there I really kind of reflect on what Sarah says on roles. Like, as a designer, I was kind of like polarized into, like, you're an artist, a designer, you sit in literally in advertising agencies, we would be called the creatives, and we'd sit on the other wing from the business accounts. And we'd get like that info funneled in the most like telephone cassé kind of way. And I've held on to these things, and I've kind of come to this place now where I'm mixing the idea of roles, initiator, maintainer, disruptor, but also there are many other roles. One form, as a facilitator, I noticed that I kind of went into that role because it allows you to control a room without that kind of sense of conflict and strong kind of butting heads. But now I realize that there is a role for facilitated or facilitative leadership. And it's complementary to disruptive leadership. And it's complementary to getting shit done leadership. And kind of really understanding the boundaries of the roles, but also the constraints, exactly as me and Ra'fat come from a country where right now, actually decentralized leadership and leadership that doesn't really have one face is the best thing we can do for our country. So these are the spaces that I'm kind of straddling now in both my career, but also as someone who realizes that artificial intelligence will soon enough make any kind of leadership unimportant or inconsequential unless we can learn it, read it, redesign it, and include everyone in it. And that's mainly how I kind of got in touch with Ra'fat more recently around our work as Swana creatives and business leaders in designing the new infrastructure that will rule our lives soon. So over to you, Ra'fat. Thank you.
Thanks, Rian. And I'd like to probe a little bit more on that later in the conversation, because I feel like it adds a lot to like the areas where all three of you kind of operate, which is reconciling and trying not to inherit. I mean, okay, I'll stop, and Jihad, maybe we'll have a dialogue later after your intervention.
Hi, thank you so much. So there's going to be a little bit of intermittent in and out because I'm on a moving train. This is the only time I could make this happen, but it's dynamic and fluid like the moving train, and that is leadership. I think that it's really interesting to hear Sarah speak. I run a drama school that was built completely differently from an independent entity of a bunch of freelancers in a major city trying to make a drama school environment happen. And as a result of that, I had to work with a whole bunch of freelancers who could only give certain amount of time to the work, to the cause, because they all had other work. Sorry, we've also got people around us, but we'll manage. But at the same time, instead of being a group of freelancers doing some kind of a potpourri, a khichdi, a goulash type mixed up dish of what a drama school is. There had to be some kind of organization. There had to be some kind of intentionality behind the coming together. And as the founder of the program 7 years ago, I was the person who really just held it all together and the one person that everyone came to. And the easiest thing I can think of is a director who's working on a devised piece of theater. Devised theater is different from directed theater. It's where the ensemble works to create together. There's a lot of consensus building, but in the whole process of that, what happens is that there is an assembly. There's a confident. Sorry. There is a consensus culture that comes around the leadership, and so it's not leader saying it this way. It's the leader really building consensus culture out of a group of contributions, and everyone trusts the leader to work with it in terms of knowing that at the end of the day, he's the person or she's the person making sure that we are all focused on common cause. And that works in a great way. And for the most part, it has, on the main part, it has worked for us. So this idea of the leader as somebody who leads an ensemble together of co-creators, co-collaborators, and making that happen. And then everyone plays different roles. And I think what Sarah's trying to do now within the institution is really brave and is the right way to go, because it feels brave, it feels terrifying, all of that. However, on the other side of that, I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. I was looking at the notes. Should we get horizontal structures instead of vertical structures, etc.? I don't know. I think hierarchies serve a purpose at particular times. And I think horizontal serves a great purpose. And I think what's happened with the silos and the labeling and everything that Lilian just sort of described as in the advertising space causes a huge dysfunctionality in the collective potential of that group of people working together towards a common cause. Having said that, I want to say that hierarchies and horizontal leadership, vertical leadership, this notion is possibly a false dichotomy. You need both. That is my key feeling. Because, for example, as a drama school, we are responsible for the students' health and well-being, student safety. We have to be accountable towards like what is happening at the end of the day to their learning journey. When they come in with a protest, with a problem, with an issue or something like that, they have to know who they're coming to and who they're holding accountable, right? And there is the concept of accountability with an ensemble, but when shit hits the fan, I'm reminded of the buck stopping here. And I think in that sense, the pyramidic structure actually does help, because at one level, you also need to get practical and say, we need to get things done in a certain amount of time. We need to get to conclusions quickly. So when you do that, then the messiness of consensus culture, the let's figure it out by committee and the whole of that by together, can get in the way. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but here am I in moments of crisis. And at that point in time, a single person needs to take control. And now I'm not anymore leading the Drama School Mumbai. I've handed it over to new teams of people. And there we had, like, unfortunately, in order for me to get out of that founder position who did everything, I needed to define the various aspects of my role, hand it over to people, and I feel like a certain pyramidic structure has begun to emerge. So I'm hoping to break that structure. I'm hoping to ensure that even though the structure is there, can we maintain a culture that is more consensus, ensemble, devised theater, and a little bit more kumbaya. So we have to figure out how we're going to do that, and we are at that juncture in our lives. Like,
thanks, Jihan. I think a lot has been put on the table that we can start kind of expanding on. If you'd like, I can put a bit of like proposals, but then we can pick up on whatever you feel more comfortable or would like to echo. One thing that I felt was interesting in the three testimonies or experiences is that there's kind of immediate action, like you're all in action. Things are being done, and kind of like the thinking feels like retrospect, and we're on the ground. We need to be doing this. We need to like fix, change, etc. So I was just wondering, where would you factor speculation and imagination in this kind of leadership role? Because leadership also implies moving people or moving a culture, which is something that Jihan, you were talking about, like when you were delegating leadership, you felt like it kind of fell back into a pyramidal structure. And this takes me to my second question a little bit. How do you feel like, or how do you reconcile the leader as a person and a leader as like a potential structure, right? Because we see a lot of people that lead institutions, and then these institutions change when these people go. How do we think about longevity of structures, longevity of systems where people can be part of that are not just because their leaders are champions?
Can I just say something whilst I have a good connection? Is
definitely
one more thing I forgot about in the conversation around leadership was, I do think of the leader as, I mean, Sarah called it HR, but I'm going to remind Sarah that she does something much more beautiful than that. It's curation, curating capability, curating human capability, and the right person for the right roles through lots of conversations is something that is a huge part of this role. I think that I think systems and structures should support personalities, if that makes any sense. I think that we have to be able to know that the leader's personality is going to somewhere reflect in the way the entity runs. But can a system support that leader in a way that you get the best of the leader versus the worst of the leader? And the structures around that leader work in that way. And that it comes from all the structures starting from selecting the leader through a curatorial process that is somewhere, has to track back to why are we here to do the thing we are here to do. You can't have anything that is systemic, anything that is articulated as process, as methodology, that does not connect back to that fundamental question of why are we here to do the thing we're here to do. Each thing, no matter how banal or simple the rule is, it has to have a connection back to that. And on the other side, all of that should come in a way that allows us to curate for good replacements, for good leaders. And all static, even these structures that we speak about, they have to be dynamic and fluid. They have to be iterative and evolutionary. By your expressions, I feel my audio is playing.
Thanks so much, Sean. Sarah,
could I come in here? Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, because I think the point that I made is that the role of head of department within a university is not necessarily something that people want to do. So there are very often very reluctant heads of departments, and this is something that comes up regularly in our Dean's Advisory Committee, which is a meeting of head of departments and the dean. And I think it's so Jahan, in response to the HR question, I love the idea of curating people and people's ideas. But it kind of, when you're working within in such a monster of an institution, and I'm going to call the university a monster, where they have particular HR policies, and it's all kind of these policies that you have to work in, it becomes quite challenging. And I suppose that's what I was referring to, the challenge of kind of trying to fit my own leadership style, or my emerging leadership style, because I hadn't really thought about it before, into the university's policies has been quite challenging. But on the other hand, one of the things, just to speak to this idea of kind of sustainability and I think you referred to it as longevity, Rafat. One of the things we have is almost like well, we call it the kind of leadership executive. Even the terminology is problematic, but anyway, that's what it's called, right? We have is myself, and then we have a head of the theater section and a head of dance. And this has been, I found it quite useful, because I've I suppose taken advantage of this particular leadership structure, and that the person who's currently the head of theater is working very closely with me and will take over from me. And I think that's really important, this idea of being able to, I mean, and obviously they're going to have a completely different way of taking the center forward, but there's been a collaboration already. The collaboration has started. So that for me has been really important, and to have a leadership structure that is not one person, at the top of the pyramid, but rather to figure out ways where, and I suppose the merger between two different departments allowed for that. So this idea of being able to bring someone else in and, just sharing of budgets, for example. I mean, when I looked at the budgets for the first time, I thought, oh my God, what am I didn't realize that they were this formed part of my role, and yeah, so that's my 2 cents around that. Thanks, Rafat.
Thank you both. I think one, it's very rich for me to hear that, because I'm coming from like a place where I'm trying to kind of get innovation and design into a humanitarian field. It's a very bureaucratic top-down space, but kind of picking up on everything. I feel, one, to kind of speak back to what Sarah's saying, a leadership that isn't about one person, and something around the business world, consulting, product, even in the bureaucracies where I am now, it's always about institutionalizing, which is the word that's used to basically how do we put governance in place and in play, and how does it move? How do you do something called succession planning, right? Which is what you're doing now. And I kind of, the more, again, the parallel I'm building is in my 20s, learning about these terms as a designer or an artist, coming into business, and that space was great for me, because I'm like, oh great, there's a practice for this, there's a methodology for this. But the more I sit in it, like I'm brewing in this goulash, let's say, from Jihan, the more I brew in it, the more I feel that these terminologies have completely flattened what it really means to work in an organism or in an organic setting, where you need some boundaries to manage the complexity, which can be hierarchy at times and can be horizontal at other times, which are just the boundaries that are set by season and time. And then all of these flat words that we start using, like when you were talking, I wrote down like buy-in, trust building, organizing. Like, these words have become very empty of their meaning because of the settings that they've become used in, and kind of the place where I'm roaming now in terms of what are the leadership frameworks that would really help us also stay agile. To go back to your question, Rafat, in terms of right now, we cannot just lead and think and have that luxury of indulging in thought processes while business goes on. We need to lead, act, and iterate, right? So one format is really taking things back to the basics. So really, like, I try to shed away these terms, buy-in, organizing, trust, but I shed them because I find that it's really not clear that everyone's on the same page. And if that's your safest bet, then just start from there. And I've kind of borrowed from agile management, which is the management technique of like producing software, right? And it really goes back to the basics of, is this a meeting to inform? Is this a meeting to make quick decisions? Is this a meeting to brainstorm and design? Or is this a meeting to decide? And kind of putting it in simple people terms reminds me that actually we're a big organism. And it's an analogy that from a book I love that actually really inspired my more later thoughts on leadership. It's called The Preservation of the Soul in Corporate America. What a book. It really builds on that thing that you were saying, Sarah, like, how do you not have one leader? You think of the organism, the human organism. Your heart isn't necessarily the leader. It has this leading quality. Your mind does too. But the synergy, the time, space, season, it all plays a part. And he builds that analogy very well across leadership and corporation, and how the word corporation comes from the word corpus, which is body. So for us to actually lead, we need to have that stamina and that synergy, and kind of really move away from weaponizing consensus, which I see all the time, whether the structure is horizontal or not. And the idea of like this tyranny of both structure and the structureless. And I feel once we have like, we kind of get out of all those binaries, like you said, Jihan, we will have the space to design things. We will have the space to humanize them. Like, nothing bothers me more than buy-in. I hate that word. Buy-in for what? From who? Who's buying what? Please stop. Like, yeah, like, what are we trying to do? Come on, humanize it. Yeah, so that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
I I'm going to jump in and kind of ask something. I want to build on the fact that we're also, there's the word structures coming up a lot, and obviously because we're all working within them, but also the fact that I think everyone here is operating in, let's use global south, like we're in a place where we have inherited both oppressive structures, but also modus operandi of how we do things. Like a lot of us are educated in the West, and we kind of are trying to reconcile this work being done in terms of leadership back home. And one of the things that kind of I've been finding interesting recently is that the word leader also has a very negative connotation, because in this part of the world, or leadership has always been kind of succeeded with like catastrophe. And I feel like it's interesting to also speak a little bit to that. Like, how do you think of the impact of the work you're doing within the structure to liberate from inherited structures, but also to impact and echo around the institution itself, rather than just think of it as an isolated being, right? So we're speaking about relational leadership within the institution. How are we impacting around the institution? And I feel like this is important in all of your experiences to speak to.
I think it's quite interesting, the example that you put forward, just because by the nature of a lot of the work I do now is around behavioral science, majorly in terms of gender and influencing how, like, because of crisis in Lebanon right now, we have an electricity crisis, we have a livelihoods crisis, we have basically inflation at, like, I think the last time I checked it was like 270%. And as an Arab society that has very particular gender norms that have been passed on through the ages, men and women tend to have certain roles within and outside the home. And as we work on influencing, for example, more women to run for in politics or in public positions, or as we work on the major disadvantage of having women do all the home care labor, we look at these roles of leadership within the house or within the nuclear home, within social norms, within how actually leadership takes on shape within tradition and ritual. And I've really been inspired by that because, for example, I remember being a little girl, and it was really heavy, actually. One of the first funeral I've ever attended, okay? It was for a close family member. And I could remember seeing, like, I can't process this as a little girl from a leadership lens, right? But what I saw was my family was distraught. The men in my family, who have consistently been the beacon of what do we do? What do we say? How do we act as a family unit, were just distraught and like in these like disorganized spaces. They weren't really making a lot of like decisions. I found that shocking. And then there was one woman, her name's Sausan. I love her. She's not a very close family member, but I saw this woman. She's like, okay, you get the coffee. Okay, you know what? We're gonna have coffee now, and then Rabia, like her kid, you make sure that food is here by this time. And I just saw this person who's just orchestrating a really hard situation into order, into also this soft, tender kind of space of togetherness, and she kind of did it really, really, really well. And ever since then, I've really had this notion of like, you know what you learn, and I notice it too, like when I take a new training where I, like, for example, for the first time I took nonviolent communication, I loved it. I was like taking it home with me. I butt heads with my mom a lot, and then I use nonviolent communication, and I feel it is definitely that osmosis of both. Like I take some of my leadership skills from Sausan, from that one funeral, you know, and sometimes my siblings and I, the way we deal with our mom and my dad and the family right now at this stage of us being in more care positions is coming from things I've learned at work. And I do believe that the more work or organizations or corporates or academia puts an effort in the relational meaning of leadership and how does it mean, it would spill over. The spillover attitudes and behaviors of positive leadership and strong leadership are insane. And that's kind of like what that resonated with. I don't know if that's kind of what you meant, but I'd let you repeat the question, Rafat, if you want.
I think that's very interesting. I mean, it's interesting because you also, the three of you, weave in a lot of the personal experiences in learning, like in what actually allows you, or where you borrow this redefining of leadership, and I find that very inspiring. This is why I've been asking kind of a little bit about.
Yeah, I think Jahan alluded to this, and so did I earlier. How what we do in processes of making performance, or in devised processes, is, or theater and performance is relational. It depends on relationships. It doesn't exist without relationships, and it's embodied, this idea of embodied relationality. And I think for me, that's one of the biggest challenges, is to, and I mentioned it, is how do we take the ways in which we work as performance makers, as teachers, as researchers in our discipline, into this institutional space. And I think that the department, certainly the performing and creative arts departments within the university, are a little bit of an anomaly for the rest of the university and how it's structured. As the university is this very, very hierarchical, patriarchal, colonial space, and I often feel like it needs to kind of implode and it needs to become something completely different. If we constantly talk about we need to decolonize the curriculum, to decolonize the space, but how can we, if we're operating within this very, very kind of colonial structure, or an inherited structure that is deeply, deeply colonial, deeply patriarchal? So, and I think that the performing and creative arts departments, and certainly I can speak for our department, which is embodied and relational, we can challenge these inherited structures. And I think that we probably need to position ourselves. Yeah, we need to challenge the center of the university, as it were, more. And for me, that's one way of managing these inherited structures that permeate everything. And it feels like we can do it slowly. I don't think it's possible to kind of challenge the whole big monolithic institution that is the university, but very slowly to find ways of working, across disciplines, and working with other departments, and offering our ways of working. I know that Mwenya, for example, is really interested in this kind of work, where we take how we work and apply them to other institutional contexts, and I think, like, how we make a piece of theater, perhaps we can offer those particular ways of working at to the university executive, in terms of dealing with leadership matters. And I think we have these tools and these ways of working that are so familiar to us, but yet when we enter that institutional organizational space, we forget about them. And I think we have to work really hard at reminding ourselves that this is what we do. So we need to translate what we do and how we do it into this institutional space. That's my sense.
I have an annoying kind of question. Like, it's annoying in my head because when I say the word, you're gonna know money, right? So when we start talking about leadership and departing from the main, like the center, which is how things happen, how things get accredited, what is good, what is bad, you feel like a kind of the immediate impact is you won't kind of prerequisites to be funded. And I'm reducing kind of the conversation, but when you're shifting away from the dominant, you may lose a little bit on like support and livelihood, etc. Does this mean that new leaderships need to continuously be small scale? How do you reconcile resources with moving away from the dominant or the traditional and maintain leadership?
I think what I'm saying is that it's not necessarily moving away. Well, it's moving away from the dominant in terms of the dominating structure in the case of the university. I'm saying it's about how do we move into that, and how do we work with that structure?
Okay.
Because yes, you're quite right. We are, we're dependent on money, basically, that's allocated.
Exactly.
To us. We can't, So rather than kind of going off on our own tangent, I think it's like, how can we work within the structures of the university, and with leadership structures, the dominant leader structures within the university, and how can we offer our ways of working yeah, so it's not necessarily, in order to try and shift, I suppose, in order to try and shift this dominant inherited structure.
Jihan,
There's a couple of things, and I'm just going to keep it brief in case of connectivity. But one is, I really do wish, I actually think for Sarah and for the department within the University of Cape Town, if there was a way of conceiving it as a black box with inputs and outputs with respect to the university.
So Jihan typed in a couple of things that I can try to. What Jihan was trying to say with the connection shopping is that the idea, I think, in response to Sarah, is that your department is a black box where with the input and output becomes kind of for the benefit of the university, but no one needs to kind of know the types of experiments that you're doing, knowing that kind of within it you're trying to develop your own rules, right? So you develop your own rules, you lead through that, and then the university can deal with, Jihan approves, we're spot on. Great. Sarah, if you'd like to respond to that.
I think that we have to explore embodied and relational ways of leadership and leading. I think it's, we are living in a time that requires us to be responsive and flexible, and we're constantly needing to change kind of our ways of responding to things, because things in the world are changing all the time, and the world is in crisis, right? And I think that this idea of being, this idea of kind of being present, really being present, and present in the body, and to be able to create a space for this idea of co-presencing or co-sensing and co-meaning making is really important. And these are, again, I come back to this idea of taking how we do things and what we do in our disciplines and translating those into these spaces. It's urgent, actually. I don't think we need to just get in there and do it. Yeah, so that's I think that's what I'm going to leave on it. Is that it's urgent, and I think we need to respond to that urgency.
I think the word responsive really kind of touches upon a lot of what's been talked about. Like, it's what I was trying to describe as like action, but it's actually in real time responding to both the historical baggage and things that are happening on the spot. Sarah, thank you very much. Lillian,
Sure.
Any closing remarks on your end?
One, thanks for kind of putting us all together, make us think about this. I think, not sure who used the term, maybe Jihan used the word intentionality. And I do believe that the more you talk about leadership and the more you put, I have to say, the likes of us, like people who come from what Sarah was saying, different backgrounds, and then translate them into what I would want to say is a corporate environment or organizational environment, like what I take from design and what I put there, and what Sarah can do for putting together theater, and what Jihan was saying about ensemble making. I wish, instead of a team building exercise for every time we want to ship off a product and we put together a team, we create the ensemble and we kind of test dynamics, right? And we kind of do strength finding of who does what well. I think that's really something to take away, is how can we translate what we do very well organically in our spaces into organizational spaces, but also kind of not destroy, because we're not there yet. We're not going to implode these structures, right? But how can we work within them by translating what we do? I think I love that. I think that's exactly what, at least what I find common between the three of us. I feel that would be my ending note. And it was kind of really lovely to meet you guys.
Okay, thank you, Lillian. This was awesome. And thank you, everyone. I think now it's time to open up the discussion. Thank you very much.